Let's get right into today's busy headlines with my no-nonsense panel. Joining me out of Sydney is New South Wales State Political Editor at the Australian newspaper, Andrew Clennell, and shortly from our Melbourne studio, my Sky News colleague and columnist at the Herald Sun, Rita Panahi. Great to have you on the show. We'll start with you, Andrew Clennell, while we're waiting for Rita. Breaking news on Cory Bernardi. Now, there was a lot of fanfare when he split out of the Liberal Party a couple of years ago to start the Australian Conservatives. I think he certainly made headway, at least in sentiment inside the centre-right, because he wasn't Malcolm Turnbull and he was pushing a more conservative, Liberal type agenda. But of course, it never translated into much of a win when Turnbull was there, or indeed at the last election at the polling booths. And today, he says, and I'll quote him directly, he's come to the inescapable conclusion from our lack of political success, our financial position and the re-election of a Morrison-led government that the rationale for the creation of the Australian Conservatives is no longer valid. What do you make of it all?
Well, I guess you could say the experiment's been a failure, but I think, and you just alluded to this, Peter, once Malcolm Turnbull was no longer Prime Minister and you sort of didn't have that leader from the left of the party, there wasn't kind of the conditions for Cory Bernardi and his party to prosper, because the Liberal Party were back in the hands of a Conservative leader, maybe not as conservative as Peter Dutton from the right, Scott Morrison's from the centre-right, but right-wing enough so that disaffected Liberals weren't looking for an alternative like the Australian Conservatives. I mean, that's one element. The other element, obviously, is the rise of One Nation again, and the rise, which we've certainly seen here in New South Wales, of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. And, there was just too much competition in that space, wasn't there? And, if he does indeed make it back into the fold of the Liberal Party, as many suspect, he'll be a very lucky man, because obviously that doesn't happen very often, but when you need a Senate vote, that can happen. And but he'd be fortunate indeed. There aren't many such defections or, certainly returns. I mean, it sort of brings you back to mind of Cheryl Kernot going from the Democrats to Labor sort of thing. It's kind of maybe not that dramatic, but dramatic enough that he'd be allowed to return into the fold if it happens, as it seems it will.
Yeah, well, it never happened in the Labor Party. You remember people like Mal Colston, they were almost excommunicated, if I can use that in a political sense, from the party. They are, on the Labor side, very much persona non grata. I mean, they did sort of have a begrudging relationship with Harradine because they needed him in many circumstances. But, Labor treat their traitors with much more contempt than the Libs, although some would say Bernardi wasn't a traitor here, he was belling the cat on Turnbull.
Yeah, well, I mean, they do have a different attitude to these things, and I think we saw it in the New South Wales Parliament with Mark Latham's maiden speech. It's customary to shake the hands of a Member of Parliament who gives their maiden speech, even if they say be from the Liberal Party. From a Labor perspective, it's the polite thing to do. Not one Labor MP in the upper house would shake Latham's hand after his maiden speech this year, and they'll term them rats, and they won't have them back. As simple as that. Just like, if you cross the floor in the Labor Party, you're gone. If you do it in the Liberal Party, you're still okay. So, there's a different ethos, and it's very much born out of their trade union background.
Unless you're a minister, if you're a minister, you've got to stand down from your portfolio. But you're absolutely right. You're still within the party, and it's a right very much that backbenchers will often exercise. Rita Panahi, this is a good move, do you think, by Cory Bernardi to start the process of coming back to the Liberal Party? Now that Christopher Pyne has left South Australian politics, is it a no-brainer?
Well, I think it is. I called for it the day after the election on the Outsiders on Sunday. I said he's served what he wanted to do. I don't think you can be too critical of him for leaving Turnbull's Liberals, because he was completely had a different set of values. As many of the base who had abandoned the Liberals, he was one of them, and I think he he had an impact. As much as he hasn't had much electoral success and, you know, his polling has been abysmal, I think whilst Turnbull was there, he was a factor in showing people that there are other options for the centre-right, that if you are a coalition voter, there are others you can vote for, certainly in the upper house. And I think it's time for the prodigal son to come home.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I suspect he will be courted, but there'll be a blood price.